Good afternoon to our CLA family members, clients, community partners, and friends. Welcome back to our live stream. We sincerely hope that all of you are staying safe and healthy at this time. We are thrilled to be continuing to keep pace today with policy. And today we have two members of our state and local government team. And we are here to talk today about the American Rescue Plan Act that we call ARPA for short, and the over $350 billion that are flowing to state and local governments that are going to alleviate pandemic-related budget burdens and implement programs within several communities. So I want to welcome today Chris Rogers. Chris is the managing principal of our state and local government practice, and also Hannah York, who is also a principal in our state and local government practice. So welcome to the two of you.
Well, thank you. Is it nice to see you, Leslie, and welcome everybody.
So we are going to talk today about how you break down the programs, the flow of funds, and other things you need to know. But before we get started, we do want to review some housekeeping with you. So as you know, we have activated the Q&A so you can talk with us during the show. If you're registered, you're able to add questions, and you're also able to like those questions so you can move those up in priority so that we can better address those for you. And we have moderators that are standing by, and they are ready to engage and interact with you. And we're going to take questions while we're live together today. So we urge you to subscribe at the CLA YouTube channel and hit that like button so that those live streams are easy to follow and that you're notified of them in the future. And we also want to make you aware of some upcoming webinars that we have. So two events that we have that are upcoming in November. On November 2nd, we have a Future of Work webinar that's upcoming. And then if you love today's program, then you absolutely don't want to miss the session that we will have that will follow up on November 9th on managing your ARPA funds webinar. So be sure to join us for those. And then just be sure to follow us on our CLA page for additional articles and white papers. And as always, contact your CLA relationship because we absolutely want to talk to you. So with that, I want to dive right in. This is a huge topic. We are just generating tons of questions from state and local governments all over the country about this. So I thought we should just start with very basic questions, though, and that is, Chris, let's just give a brief overview of what the ARPA and the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund program is.
Great. Well, thank you, Leslie. Yes, ARPA. The government lives in an acronym world. So the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funds, it actually distributed about $600 billion, a little over $600 billion to governments. But specifically today, we're talking about the state and local fiscal recovery funds, which put $350 billion out to governments. And that was broken down by about $195 billion to states in the District of Columbia. We had another $65 billion that's going out to counties. $46 billion is going to what's referred to as metropolitan cities. Think cities with a population greater than 50,000. We have another $20 billion going to tribal entities. $4.5 billion is going to U.S. territories. And then we have $19.5 billion that's being distributed to a new term, non-entitlement units of government. And the best way to think about those governments is cities or towns that have under 50,000 in population. So the interesting thing about the state and local fiscal recovery funds, especially when we look back at the CARES Act and the $150 billion that was distributed to governments during that time, well, it was distributed through the CARES Act, the coronavirus relief funds. That only went to 200 government recipients. Under ARPA, there's over 31,000 governments that are receiving this money. So this is a huge change in the distribution method. All of these governments are not receiving the money up front. It's coming in two tranches. Half of it, more than likely, all of them have received by this point in time. And then they'll receive the other half a year after the date of the award. So over the next 12 months, all of the money should be in the hands of the governments that are receiving this money. I think the other important thing, and and I like to go back and compare it to the coronavirus relief funds that were part of the CARES Act, because it is a lot different. When that money first came out under the CRF, there was an immediate requirement to spend. So they came out in March, and the initial spending requirement was December 31st of 20 or December 30th of 20. That was subsequently changed to December 31st of 21. Well, under ARPA, you have until December 31st, 2024 to obligate the funds, and until December 31st, 2026 to actually spend the money. Or better way to say it is to liquidate the obligations that were outstanding at that time. So that's the overview of the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund program.
That is such a good overview, and you can definitely just hear how widely dispersed these funds are going with all of the different definitions of the types of governmental entities that it's going to. And I think you can also just feel how widely spaced out the funds are going, which is why I think we're also just hearing about a lot of the traction that it's getting right now. So thanks for that overview. I think now, Hannah, let's turn to you and just discuss what types of expenditures are allowable within this program.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Another thing that's really unique about this program, unlike CARES, is there is a wider variety of the type of expenditures that are allowable under this program. Where we didn't have before, we now have the ability to do water and sewer infrastructure. So I'm just going to quickly go through the basic 6 main categories of expenses. The first one is the water sewer infrastructure. And the way that the Treasury has basically defined on how to know whether or not it's an allowable program is to look to the Clean Water Act revolving fund and the Drinking Water Act revolving fund. And they're directing the government to basically follow the requirements under those 2 existing programs. The second infrastructure type that they're allowing is for broadband infrastructure. So the focus of this category is to expand and improve the internet access to neighborhoods and business areas that had limited access to the internet during the pandemic. With most businesses and schools going to a remote, capacity, that was particularly difficult for some of these areas that have limited internet access, especially with some students and some of the businesses. The third category of spending is what they call premium pay. So the intent of the premium pay is to allow the government to give additional pay to lower income essential workers who worked throughout the pandemic, public facing, putting themselves at risk of contracting COVID. And so, and they're especially wanting to focus that on that low income population. So the interim final rule did limit the amount that any individual person can receive under this program, and it's to $13 an hour that they actually worked public facing, not remote, and then a limit of any individual person can only get $20,000. Not only, I mean, that's a good amount of money, but it limits it to $20,000 per individual. And it did specify that if they are targeting those who are at 150% or less of the poverty rate. And if there are any private recipients out there that, if you're interested in doing these programs, reach out to the local government, in your area to work with them on this program. So the next category is the public health. This is the one that I like to refer to as the CARES-like category, very similar to the type of expenses that were allowable under CARE, the traditional vaccination, contact tracing, PP&E, public safety expenses. But in addition to that, they're actually allowing capital expenditures for public buildings, such as HVAC improvements for better quality airflow, which will benefit the health and safety of everyone in there. You can do building modifications to public buildings for providing better social distancing. And then also they're, recognizing that mental health and substance abuse was something that was exacerbated by the pandemic. They're also allowing for costs associated with, assisting and providing those services. The fifth category is negative economic impact. So this is the area where they're looking at governments to develop programs to assist both households and businesses. On the household side of things, you're able to provide rent assistance, food programs, mortgage assistance, eviction prevention, job training, and even cash aid to needy families. For businesses, the funds are really geared towards those industries that were most affected, like the tourism, travel, retail, restaurants, nonprofits who, when everyone else is cutting back on spending, they're not donating as much either. So those are the areas that it's really targeted at giving assistance to. And then kind of as a subcategory of this is the interim final rule and the legislation really wanted governments to focus on that disproportionately impacted communities. So that's going to be the more lower income, those who may be stuck in their home, older population. And so the categories that fall under there, they're going to have the education assistance, healthy child environments, housing support, and then social determinants of health. So the sixth category is revenue loss replacement. And this was very unique in that there's, basically the intent of this program was to help governments to get back to their pre-pandemic level of service. So a lot of governments didn't have as much of their local receipt revenue coming in. Things are shut down. They're not getting meals tax, housing taxes related to hotel motels. So what they're looking at doing here is there's kind of a two-step process with it, where first you have to look at how much you lost, and then general expenses that you can spend those on. And then finally, it's not really a category, but in addition to those costs, the program does allow to charge administrative costs. So if you have administrative costs that are related to the grant program, you can charge those as well, as long as they're reasonable.
A really good overview, Hannah. And one of the things that you did touch on was this revenue loss category. So speaking of revenue loss, there's some confusion around the use of funds. And so can you clarify what types of costs would be covered with that?
Yes, absolutely. And just to kind of reiterate what I said about it being a multi-step process. So the first, to kind of take a step back, the first part of that process is calculating the revenue. That can be a confusing, process in itself. So first, they're looking at it being entity-wide, not just a specific type of revenue. You're looking at it on an entity-wide basis. So the guidance did, tell you what kind of cost to use. It gave you some formula to use. So once you've gotten through the process of figuring out that calculation, the second step is you have to spend that money. You can't take that money, put it into a reserve fund or a rainy day fund or a stabilization fund. It's actually intended to spend on, whether it's operating costs or capital outlay of the government. Now, this is where people have gotten confused. Expenses spent on this one do not have to qualify under any of the other six categories. In general, most normal governmental service expenses would be covered. The exceptions are, as I said before, the reserve funds, the stabilization funds. You're not allowed to use it to pay debt service, and you're not allowed to use it for legal settlements and judgments. Outside of that, the Treasury is giving a lot of latitude to governments to determine what they need.
Well, I think that's a helpful overview. So we've talked a little bit about overview of the program. We've talked about allowable expenses. All of these programs have rules. So, another rule that I would imagine would be out there is reporting requirements. And so, Chris, that's a common theme that we see with many of these programs. Perhaps you can elaborate on that as well.
Sure. And I'd say the reporting requirements for the state and local fiscal recovery funds is very robust, although not finalized, and I'll get into that shortly. But when I look at reporting for ARPA, it's really a three-pronged approach from Treasury. We've already had two reports or two reporting deadlines that have passed. The first was there was an interim report that was required to be filed by August 31st. It was a one-time report that focused on just an initial overview and status of and use of the funds. Now, depending on what type of entity you were, you did not, you may have not even received the monies until the end of July, maybe sometime in August. So you would have had no activity. And I think there was a lot of, other than maybe the larger states, the larger entities, there wasn't probably a lot of reporting related to that. But it was a one-time deal. And the non-entitlement units of government were excluded from having to file that report. The second report is the recovery plan, or the recovery plan performance report. That was due August 31st as well. But that was only required for governments with greater than 250,000 in population. The key thing about that report is that you actually had to post it on your website. Obviously, you had to submit it to Treasury as well. But that will be refreshed every year. It's an annual report. And that refresh will also have to be posted on your website. And that report really focuses on, it's going to provide information on the projects that you're doing. It's going to have key performance indicators. And really, it's going to get down to, are you achieving what you set out to do is in compliance with the ARPA laws and regulations? And I think Hannah hit on it when she was talking about allowability. It's also going to discuss or address the equitableness of the monies being spent, because that, throughout the guidance, the equity is very prevalent in the guidance. And then the third reporting mechanism is the project and expenditure reports. Now, the project and expenditure reports were supposed to be, the first tranche was supposed to be due in a couple days here on October 31st. On September 30th, Treasury sent out notice that reporting has been delayed because they're still finalizing the guidance. Now, that guidance has not been finalized as of today, but the due date, the first project and expenditure report, is due January 31st, 2022. And then for entities that received greater than $5 million, greater than $5 million, those quarterly reports are due every quarter, no later than 30 days after the quarter end. For entities that receive less than $5 million, they're only due annually. So big difference in the reporting requirements. But it's not just financial reporting, and that's the thing that is very apparent from the guidance that's already been issued by Treasury, is that recipients are going to have to report on a lot of programmatic data. So Hannah discussed the allowability buckets that, whether it's premium pay or public health response, whatever it may be. Well, when we go to reporting, there's a lot of subcategories that you're going to have to identify. So whether it's vaccination, whether it's small business economic assistance, whether it's broadband, whatever it may be, there's a lot of subcategory reporting that's required. And above and beyond that, there is going to be, it's the best example I can give is probably like a broadband. On broadband, you're going to have to identify the number of miles, the cost per mile, the cost per passing, the number of households served. It really drills down. So one thing that's important before you get into making the determination of, we're going to go do this project, you need to understand all the reporting requirements before you do it, because you don't want to do it on the back end or have it become a surprise, because that reporting will sneak up on you, and it's what Treasury is looking for. I don't have a date on when the guidance it will be finalized by Treasury, but I would anticipate that it would be completed sometime before Thanksgiving, maybe early December, since the January 31st is the initial reporting deadline.
So certainly a challenge that we've seen with every program has been the nuances of reporting. This one sounds especially onerous to me. But Hannah, I know that there are probably many other challenges that governments are facing with putting these funds to work. Chris certainly highlighted, I think, one challenge, but perhaps you could highlight other challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the biggest challenges that I've seen that governments are going to face is really, how do they decide, because there's so much opportunity for different programs, how do they decide which ones are going to be the most beneficial to their community? Part of the achievement of that goal should be to reach out to community members. So you want to look to the community members. What do the community think they want? and what they need. And then as well as developing an internal team of all the different stakeholders, department heads, looking to what's needed at each of those levels. So part of the reason they gave such a wide variety of cost tiers is that every community is different and has been impacted differently by the pandemics. And so that's why they gave those. The second challenge I see is how to administer the funds. Anyone who's worked in government for a while knows that there's always a shortage of resources available to government, both financially and employees. So being able to now manage this large program, which as Chris discussed, has a tremendous amount of reporting requirements, and making sure someone who can look to the guidance, knows what's eligible, and manage all that can be truly difficult with your current staffing levels. So governments need to consider whether or not they need to either reach out, hire an outside consultant who's familiar with the rules, the regulations, and reporting, or to hire some temporary staff who have the right mixed skill set to be able to manage that on a daily basis. And then the last one, I think that goes along with some of the reporting that Chris was talking about, is if they decide that they're going to award some of these funds to like a local business, a not-for-profit, that opens up a whole other box of subrecipient monitoring and compliance agreements for subawarding the federal funds. So those are just all things that the governments are having to deal with and think about.
Yeah, I think those are a really good overview of just additional challenges. Every opportunity, I think, creates some unique challenges and likely also some risks. And so, Chris, that's a great segue back to you, is that, what do you see as government's greatest risks as they look at these funds?
Well, I would say there's three primary risks. And the first risk exists in every grant that you receive, and that's the risk of noncompliance. If you do not follow the allowability or eligibility requirements, you may have to pay that money back to the federal government. What I think is very different than in the past is obviously the number of recipients of this money. We're going to have a lot of first-time entities that have to have a single audit performed, which is you have to have full financial statement audit and a federal compliance audit for what's referred to as a major program. Well, if you don't have the internal controls in place as it relates to those programs, you're at risk for non-compliance and potentially sending money back to the federal government. And then resources. I'll be honest with you, I have had conversations with many clients, new and older clients, that just say, we don't have the resources to do this anymore. We're tired. It has been a long, almost 2 years. We're getting closer to 2 years now. And the resources just aren't there. It's a lot of money for governmental entities to administer. The larger the entity, I don't want to say it's easy, but they may have the resources to do it. But as you get down to those smaller entities, the resources aren't quite as plentiful as they are at the larger organizations. The second risk that I see really relates to not meeting the community's needs. And I say that is because that is the whole purpose of these funds, right? Was to assist the community in coming back from COVID-19. And I think as long as they're going down the path of getting the community input and getting from the community groups, I don't think there's a risk that they will fail because they're going to hear from the community. But that is a lot different than other grants that they receive. They may have community input, but the level is a lot different for ARPA. And then the third risk I see is inefficiencies in their processing. Inefficiencies in processing will lead to greater administrative costs, which means that less money will get out to the community, right? So, and if you go back and you look at the emergency rental assistance programs that have been out there, their allowable administrative costs were 10 to 15%. And if you look at the billions of dollars that are out there, I mean, everybody here can do math. Just 40 billion was allocated to housing, or excuse me, 21.5 billion was dedicated to the rental assistance program. Well, 15% of that could be spent on administrative costs. That's a lot of money. So, and even from our standpoint, we are in this industry. This is what we do, and we're looking for ways to try and save our clients and our communities that administrative costs, and that has led us to develop a software platform to assist in that process, which everyone can learn more about on our November 9th webinar.
Yeah, I think that's really good overview of the risks. I think this has also spurred a lot of questions, and so I'd like to address a few from the audience if you guys don't mind. So the first one that we've got is related to just some of the rules for spending ARPA funds. So the first question is that the rules for spending the ARPA funds seem to be focused solely on cities, and we have no sewer or water utilities, no manufacturing, and so it's hard to decide the best place to put any new broadband towers and help to be fair to any residents. So can you help, think through that?
I think that is a very large discussion. I do. I do. There's not a simple answer there. You have to know the economics, the type of community, that type of thing to really have any, to have it mean anything.
Yeah, Chris, I would add that may be a situation where they're going to want to reach out to a consultant to help them with looking at the different options.
Great feedback there. All right, we have another one, and it says, our organization manages the largest Meals on Wheels program in our state, which provides meals to homebound older adults. And we've seen our program grow through the pandemic. Would this fall under the social determinants of health program and be applicable use of ARPA funds?
So within the negative economic impact, actually the very first program listed under there for the reporting requirements is household assistance for food programs. So for people who are food at risk, that's absolutely an allowable expenditure of the ARPA funds for those, for the food programs.
That's great. So another question we've gotten is, if a small rural township didn't increase their levy, will this be considered a revenue loss so they can qualify to spend money and spend it how they want to? Maybe so that's a loaded question.
I mean, it's an interesting question. That's not how the formula works. How it's going to work is you look at your historical growth rate. So if historically every year you're increasing your levy, and then you stop, then it will fall into that, and it'll naturally come out of the formula. But in essence, what it does is you look at your growth rate, or the Treasury allows you to use a growth rate of 4.1%. You look at a base year, you look at your actual year, and determine how much of a loss there was. So once again, loaded question. It depends on the history.
Okay. We also have one that's probably related to cost eligibility, I would say. So it says Treasury caps administrative costs at 10% for the recipient, i.e. the state. Does this apply to admin costs for sub-grantees we contract with to provide eligible services? And we may not know that yet.
Well, in administrative, if a sub-recipient relationship exists, those would have to be built into the sub-recipient agreement if they were allowed.
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to speak with whoever asked that question about that.
Yeah, and I think that's really the right thing. Some of these are probably very complex matters, and I think that's the point, is that if you've got a complex matter, reach out to our team, because we absolutely want to connect and chat with you. Well, with that, we are at time today. So Chris, Hannah, I want to thank you so much for the overview. I know you guys are going to be going into much deeper depth on November 9th on this, and so thank you so much for your time today. I also want to thank our moderators who have been live with us today, answering questions in the chat, and to all of you who've been asking questions for your engagement with us. We want to continue to encourage you to register and engage with us. We absolutely love having you be part of the conversation, and we are going to see you next week, where we are going to continue to keep pace with policy and keep following all the legislative developments that are happening in Congress. But until then, everybody stay safe and healthy and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.